Edit fired single dad fed an elderly woman. Unaware she was the billionaire who could clear his name, what could possibly connect one simple act of kindness with the chance to restore a person's reputation? And how could a single unexpected encounter change everything without either person realizing it? Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you've chosen to spend a little time with us today. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about kindness, dignity, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for your continued support. It truly helps us share more meaningful journeys with viewers around the world. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe one small act of kindness can change someone's future? Now let's step into the beginning of this unforgettable story. The truth has a quiet way of finding those who never stop choosing kindness. The conference room fell silent long before anyone officially ended the meeting. Dozens of eyes followed Ethan Walker as he gathered the few belongings from his desk into a worn cardboard box that had once carried printer paper. No one offered to help. A few looked away. Others whispered behind glowing computer screens, pretending they hadn't just watched a hard-working father lose everything in less than 10 minutes. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't demand another chance. He simply buttoned the cuffs of his faded blue work shirt, picked up the framed photograph of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and walked toward the elevator with the same quiet dignity he had carried into the building every morning for the last 11 years. Outside, late autumn had settled over downtown Chicago. A cold wind slipped between the glass towers, scattering golden leaves across the sidewalk, while gray clouds swallowed what little afternoon sunlight remained. Ethan stood for a moment beneath the company's polished steel logo, reading the words that had once filled him with pride. They had accused him of leaking confidential financial records, a claim repeated so many times during the investigation that it began sounding like fact even without proof. His employee badge no longer opened the front doors. His company email had already disappeared. By sunset, his name would likely be erased from every internal system as if he had never existed at all. He reached into his wallet. $23 and some loose change stared back at him. It wasn't enough to cover next week's groceries, let alone the mortgage payment waiting on the kitchen counter back home. Still, when his phone buzzed with a text from Lily asking if everything had gone well at work, Ethan smiled before typing a simple reply. "I'll be home soon, sweetheart. We'll have dinner together." He refused to let fear become the first thing his daughter remembered about difficult days. As he began the long walk toward the train station instead of paying for a rideshare, the city moved around him without noticing another man carrying invisible heartbreak. Taxi horns echoed through crowded intersections. Steam drifted from sidewalk vents. The smell of roasted chestnuts floated from a street vendor, mixing with fresh coffee and damp pavement after an earlier drizzle. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet inside Ethan, something precious had cracked. Not his integrity, not his compassion, only the fragile certainty that doing the right thing would always be enough. He didn't know that somewhere beyond the crowded streets, a quiet chain of events had already begun moving toward him. He couldn't imagine that the smallest choice he would make before the day ended would become the first step in reclaiming something far more valuable than a paycheck. For now, he was simply a father trying to make it home before his little girl realized the world had become a little colder. By the time Ethan reached Maple Street, the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and the familiar porch light of his modest white house glowed warmly against the gathering dusk. Before he could even reach the front steps, the front door burst open. Lily hurried across the porch with the boundless energy only a child could carry after a long school day. Her sandy blonde ponytail bounced behind her as she wrapped both arms around her father without asking why he was home earlier than usual. Ethan hugged her tightly, holding on just a little longer than normal before quietly setting the cardboard box behind one of the porch chairs where she would not notice it. "Did you bring home another funny office story?" she asked with a hopeful grin. Ethan smiled gently. "Not today. I thought maybe we could make pancakes for dinner instead." Lily's eyes brightened immediately. Breakfast for dinner is always the best. Inside the small kitchen, the familiar sounds of ordinary life softened the weight pressing against Ethan's shoulders. Butter melted across an old cast-iron skillet. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the room, while Lily carefully stirred the batter exactly the way her mother had taught her years before. The framed family photographs along the wall told a quieter story, one of birthdays, camping trips, school concerts, and a smiling woman whose absence still echoed through every room. Ethan caught himself staring at one picture for a heartbeat longer before returning his attention to the pancakes. He had made a promise after losing his wife that Lily would never carry the burden of adult worries before she had to. Tonight that promise felt heavier than ever. After dinner, Lily spread her homework across the kitchen table, while Ethan opened a drawer containing unpaid bills. The mortgage statement sat on top, followed by the electric bill, the gas bill, and a notice reminding him that his health insurance coverage would soon expire unless he arranged new employment. He quietly added the numbers together with a pencil. Even if every dollar in his savings remained untouched, he could not stretch it far enough without another paycheck. His thoughts were interrupted by Lily's cheerful voice. "Dad, my teacher says our class is collecting canned food this week for families who need help." Ethan looked up and smiled. "That sounds like a wonderful idea." She nodded proudly. Everyone deserves dinner. Those 4 simple words settled deep inside him. Children had a way of speaking truths adults often buried beneath fear and disappointment. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep beneath her favorite patchwork quilt, Ethan sat alone on the front porch with a mug of lukewarm coffee. The neighborhood was peaceful except for the distant whistle of a freight train and the rustling leaves carried by the autumn breeze. He checked several job listings on his aging phone, submitting applications wherever his experience seemed to fit, although each application felt like another stone tossed into an endless ocean. Just as he slipped the phone back into his pocket, his stomach reminded him that he had skipped lunch to save money. He glanced toward the small 24-hour diner a few blocks away. Perhaps a cup of coffee there would help clear his thoughts before tomorrow's search began. Without realizing it, Ethan stood, locked the front door quietly behind him, and started walking into the cool night toward the moment that would slowly begin changing everything he believed had already been lost. The little diner sat quietly beneath a flickering neon sign that had probably welcomed tired travelers for decades. Warm light spilled through the front windows, pushing back the cold darkness that wrapped around the nearly empty parking lot. Ethan stepped inside, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee, grilled onions, and homemade pie greeted him like an old friend. A waitress smiled politely before pouring him a cup of coffee without asking. He thanked her softly and chose the booth nearest the window, hoping the simple warmth would settle the restless thoughts that refused to leave his mind. As he wrapped both hands around the steaming mug, he noticed an elderly woman sitting alone in the far corner. Her silver hair was neatly brushed beneath a knitted hat, and although her coat was clean, it had clearly seen many winters. She studied the menu for several quiet moments before gently closing it and asking the waitress for nothing more than a glass of water. The waitress nodded kindly, but Ethan caught the brief hesitation in her eyes, the kind that appeared when someone recognized a difficult situation yet did not know how to help. He looked back at his own menu. The cheapest breakfast special cost almost half of what remained in his wallet. He silently counted the bills folded inside once again, hoping the numbers might somehow change. They did not. Rent was coming. Utilities were waiting. His refrigerator at home was nearly empty. Every dollar mattered now. Yet across the room, the elderly woman carefully folded her trembling hands together as though she had already accepted another night without a warm meal. Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear Lily's voice from earlier that evening. "Everyone deserves dinner." The words echoed gently inside him until they became impossible to ignore. He stood, walked to the counter, and quietly asked the waitress to bring the breakfast special to the woman instead of to his own table. The waitress blinked with surprise. "Are you sure, sir? That will leave you with just coffee." Ethan smiled. "Coffee will keep me warm. Please do not tell her it came from me." The waitress nodded, her expression softening with quiet respect. Several minutes later, she carried the steaming plate to the elderly woman, who looked genuinely confused before glancing around the nearly empty diner. Her eyes eventually settled on Ethan. He simply raised his coffee mug with a small smile and returned his attention to the rain beginning to collect on the window outside. After a long pause, the woman slowly carried her plate to his booth. "May I sit here?" she asked in a gentle voice. Ethan stood politely. "Of course." She thanked him and took the seat across from him. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward, filled only by the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and an old country song playing quietly from the jukebox. Finally, the woman looked up with calm blue eyes that carried both wisdom and sadness. "Young man," she said, "people rarely give without expecting something in return." Ethan shook his head. "My father used to tell me that kindness loses its meaning the moment it comes with a price." The elderly woman studied him carefully, as though those simple words had awakened a memory she had nearly forgotten. Then she smiled, not the polite smile of a stranger, but one that carried quiet gratitude and a mystery Ethan could not possibly understand. When Ethan finally stood to leave, the elderly woman reached into the pocket of her weathered coat and removed a neatly folded handkerchief embroidered with tiny blue flowers. She carefully wiped the edge of her coffee cup before smiling again. "Thank you for reminding an old woman that goodness still exists," she said softly. Ethan shrugged with quiet humility. "I only bought breakfast." She slowly shook her head. "No, you offered respect. Those are not always the same thing." Her words stayed with him long after they stepped outside into the chilly night. The wind had grown stronger, carrying dry leaves across the sidewalk while distant traffic hummed beneath the glow of streetlights. Ethan noticed that the woman hesitated before crossing the street, so he walked beside her without making it seem like charity. They reached a small city park where an aging wooden bench overlooked a fountain that had already been shut down for the season. She thanked him once more and assured him she would be fine from there. Before leaving, she asked one unexpected question. "If tomorrow brought you everything you lost today, what would matter most?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He slipped both hands into his jacket pockets and looked toward the quiet neighborhood beyond the park. "My daughter believing that her father never stopped doing the right thing," he finally replied. "Money comes and goes. A child's trust does not." The elderly woman lowered her eyes for a brief moment, as though his answer had touched a place few people ever reached. "Then I hope life remembers your kindness," she whispered. Ethan smiled politely, wished her a peaceful evening, and continued walking home beneath the cold November sky. The next several days settled into a difficult routine. Every morning, after walking Lily to school, he visited employment agencies, repair shops, warehouses, and small businesses throughout the city. He carried neatly printed copies of his resume inside a simple folder that slowly became worn around the edges. Some managers accepted it with courteous smiles. Others recognized his name from recent headlines and quietly explained that no positions were available. Ethan never argued. He thanked each person before moving on to the next opportunity, refusing to allow disappointment to harden his heart. On Thursday afternoon, while stopping by the same diner for another inexpensive cup of coffee, he noticed the elderly woman sitting in her familiar corner booth. This time she was reading a thick hardcover book with small handwritten notes tucked between several pages. When she saw Ethan, her face brightened with genuine warmth. "You came back," she said. Ethan chuckled. "I could say the same thing." Over the next hour, they spoke about ordinary things that somehow felt important. She asked about Lily's love of drawing. He learned that the woman enjoyed classical music, old libraries, and watching the sunrise whenever she could. Strangely, she never spoke about family, work, or where she lived. Ethan respected the silence. Some stories belonged to their owners until they were ready to share them. As he prepared to leave, the waitress quietly leaned toward him with a puzzled smile. "You know," she whispered, "that lady always pays in cash, tips generously, and somehow never tells anyone her name." Ethan simply looked toward the corner booth where the elderly woman had returned to her book, completely unaware that the greatest mystery in his life had just begun unfolding one quiet conversation at a time. On Friday morning, the first letter arrived. It was not another rejection from an employer. It was a formal notice from the bank informing Ethan that unless his overdue mortgage payments were resolved within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. He folded the paper carefully before slipping it back into the envelope, making certain Lily never saw it lying on the kitchen counter. She deserved breakfast filled with laughter, not conversations about bills. As she skipped toward the school bus carrying a backpack nearly as large as she was, Ethan waved until the bus disappeared around the corner. Only then did the smile quietly fade from his face. The hours that followed seemed to blur together beneath gray skies and cold winds. One interview ended after only 6 minutes when the hiring manager politely explained that the company preferred applicants without recent public controversy. Another manager admitted that Ethan's qualifications were impressive, but said the business could not risk unwanted attention from clients. Ethan thanked both of them with the same calm voice. He never pleaded. He never complained. By late afternoon, he found himself sitting once again inside the familiar diner, warming his hands around another inexpensive cup of coffee. The elderly woman arrived a few minutes later carrying the same well-worn book beneath her arm. She immediately noticed the exhaustion behind Ethan's eyes. "You have been carrying something heavy," she said gently. Ethan offered a small smile. "Nothing that millions of people have not carried before." She tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones no one else can see." For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows while the neon sign reflected across the wet sidewalk. Finally, Ethan admitted, "I lost my job because someone blamed me for something I did not do." It is difficult convincing strangers to trust you when they have already decided who you are. The woman listened without interrupting. There was no quick advice, no empty reassurance, only the quiet respect of someone allowing another person to be heard. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Did you tell the truth?" Ethan looked directly into her steady blue eyes. "Every single time." She nodded slowly as though that answer mattered more than any explanation that could have followed. "Then do not let another person's lie become your identity," she said. Truth often travels more slowly than rumor, but it has a remarkable habit of arriving exactly when it is needed. Ethan let out a soft breath that felt lighter than the one before it. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence before he insisted on paying for a simple bowl of soup for her despite knowing his wallet was growing thinner each day. She accepted with visible gratitude but watched him carefully as he counted every dollar. Before leaving, she reached across the table and gently rested her hand over his for only a brief moment. "You have given more than food," she whispered. "You have given someone the chance to believe in goodness again." Ethan smiled politely, unaware that several blocks away, inside the top floor of a gleaming office tower overlooking the city, a confidential investigation had quietly resumed after remaining untouched for weeks, and for the very first time since he had been dismissed, the path toward restoring his name had begun to move. The following Monday began like every other difficult morning, with Ethan walking Lily to school beneath a pale sky that promised another cold day. She chatted excitedly about an upcoming art project, describing the picture she wanted to paint of a little white house surrounded by maple trees. Ethan listened carefully, smiling at every detail, grateful that her world was still filled with colors instead of worries. After hugging her goodbye outside the school entrance, he headed toward the public library to search for more job openings using the free computers. Hours passed without success. Every application seemed to disappear into silence. By early afternoon, he found himself returning to the diner almost out of habit, hoping that one familiar place in the city still felt welcoming. The waitress greeted him with the same warm smile, but before he could ask for coffee, she hesitated. "Your friend has not been here for 3 days," she said quietly. Ethan looked toward the corner booth that had become almost permanently associated with the elderly woman. It sat empty beneath the soft yellow light. For reasons he could not explain, the sight unsettled him more than another rejected application ever could. He ordered only coffee and remained there for nearly an hour, occasionally glancing toward the entrance each time the bell above the door chimed. She never arrived. As he prepared to leave, the waitress handed him a small paper bag. "She paid for this before she disappeared," she explained. "She told me that if you came back before she did, I should give it to you." Ethan accepted the bag with quiet surprise. Inside was a homemade blueberry muffin wrapped carefully in wax paper and a handwritten note folded into a perfect square. He unfolded it slowly. The message contained only one sentence written in graceful handwriting. "Never measure your future by your hardest season." There was no signature, no address, no explanation. Ethan stared at the words for several moments before carefully placing the note inside his wallet beside Lily's school picture. Somehow it felt too important to throw away. Outside, the afternoon sun briefly pushed through the clouds, casting long beams of light across the wet sidewalks. As Ethan crossed the street, a sleek black sedan rolled quietly past before stopping at the traffic light. Inside, hidden behind lightly tinted windows, The elderly woman watched him with calm blue eyes. She was no longer wearing the faded winter coat or knitted hat. Instead, she wore an elegant navy suit beneath a tailored overcoat, her silver hair perfectly styled. Beside her sat a distinguished man carrying a leather portfolio filled with documents. "He still does not know," the man said respectfully. The woman smiled gently, without taking her eyes off Ethan as he disappeared into the afternoon crowd, carrying nothing more than a paper bag and quiet hope. "No," she answered. "And that is exactly why I needed to know who he truly was." The driver waited patiently as the traffic light changed from red to green. Before the sedan pulled away, the woman opened the portfolio resting on her lap. Inside were financial reports, investigative notes, company records, and one familiar employee file bearing Ethan Walker's name across the top. She rested her fingertips lightly on the folder before closing it once again. "It is time," she whispered. "Find everyone who touched this case. I want the complete truth, not the convenient version." The sedan disappeared into downtown traffic while Ethan continued walking in the opposite direction, completely unaware that the quiet stranger whose breakfast he had once purchased had just begun the first real effort to uncover the truth that could finally restore his good name. 2 mornings later, Ethan was repairing a loose fence behind his small house when an unfamiliar sedan stopped quietly across the street. It remained there only a minute before, driving away without anyone stepping outside. He thought little of it and returned to his work, unaware that the visitors had only come to confirm one simple fact. The man they had been investigating truly lived exactly as he claimed. No hidden wealth, no secret accounts, no lavish lifestyle purchased through dishonesty. Only a modest home, a devoted father, and a little girl who waved happily to every passing neighbor. Across the city, the atmosphere inside Sterling Holdings could not have been more different. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline as senior executives gathered around a polished walnut conference table. Every conversation stopped when the elderly woman entered the room. She no longer resembled the quiet stranger from the diner. Her tailored navy suit, composed posture, and calm authority transformed the room before she spoke a single word. "Good morning, Ms. Evelyn Sterling," several executives greeted in unison. She acknowledged them with a gentle nod before taking her seat at the head of the table. The leather portfolio containing Ethan Walker's file rested before her. "I have reviewed every preliminary report," she began calmly. "Now I would like the complete truth." A gray-haired attorney opened a folder thick with documents. "Our independent review found several inconsistencies in the internal investigation conducted by Ethan Walker's former employer." Evelyn remained silent, allowing him to continue. Important financial records were omitted. Access logs were incomplete. Several digital timestamps do not match the official timeline presented during the dismissal process. Another investigator carefully placed additional files onto the table. "We also interviewed former employees who were never contacted during the original inquiry. Their statements consistently describe Mr. Walker as meticulous, honest, and unwilling to bypass company policy, even under pressure." No one interrupted. The only sound was the quiet turning of pages and the distant hum of the building's climate system. Evelyn folded her hands thoughtfully. "Has anyone found evidence that he personally benefited from the accusations made against him?" The attorney answered immediately. "None whatsoever." She looked toward another investigator. "Then who benefited?" The room became noticeably quieter. After a brief pause, a financial analyst spoke with measured confidence. "The evidence increasingly suggests that responsibility may have been redirected away from another executive during a period of significant financial reporting." Evelyn did not react with anger. Instead, she slowly closed the file before her. "Truth does not disappear simply because someone delays it," she said softly. "Continue until every document, every email, and every decision has been verified." Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived at Lily's school just in time for the annual student art display. Parents admired colorful paintings covering the hallways, while children proudly explained their work. Lily ran toward him carrying a canvas filled with bright autumn trees surrounding a little white house. In the center stood a father holding his daughter's hand beneath a clear blue sky. Across the top she had written in careful letters, "Home is where good hearts stay together." Ethan felt his throat tighten as he looked at the painting. "Do you like it?" she asked hopefully. He smiled with quiet pride. More than you could ever imagine. Neither of them noticed a familiar silver-haired woman standing discreetly near the back of the hallway, observing the moment with gentle eyes before quietly turning away, carrying with her an even deeper certainty that the man she intended to help had already proven the value of his character long before anyone ever questioned his name. The invitation arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon in a thick cream-colored envelope delivered by courier instead of regular mail. Ethan almost assumed it had been sent to the wrong address. The elegant stationery inside requested his presence at Sterling Holdings headquarters the following morning at 10 o'clock, stating only that his attendance concerned an ongoing review connected to his former employment. No explanation. No signature beyond the name of the executive office. Ethan read the letter twice before carefully folding it and placing it beside Lily's drawing on the kitchen table. That evening, he barely touched his dinner. Lily noticed immediately. "Are you nervous?" she asked while coloring another page in her sketchbook. Ethan smiled honestly. "A little." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand with surprising confidence. "You always tell me that telling the truth means you never have to remember a different story." Ethan laughed softly. "I did say that." She grinned. "Then you already know what to do tomorrow." The next morning dawned bright and unusually clear after nearly a week of gray skies. Ethan wore the same navy suit he had purchased years earlier for a company awards banquet, carefully pressing every crease before leaving home. Although the fabric had become slightly worn at the sleeves, he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had never left him. The lobby of Sterling Holdings reflected polished marble, warm sunlight, and understated elegance. A receptionist greeted him by name before escorting him to a private conference room overlooking the Chicago River. No one kept him waiting. A few minutes later, the door opened gently, and Ethan immediately recognized the familiar blue eyes of the elderly woman from the diner. For a brief moment, he simply stared, unable to reconcile the gentle stranger who had shared coffee and quiet conversations with the poised business leader entering the room. She smiled warmly, exactly as she always had. "Good morning, Ethan." He slowly rose from his chair. "It was you." She nodded. "My name is Evelyn Sterling." Silence settled over the room, not uncomfortable but profound. Ethan looked from her to the executives seated quietly along the far side of the conference table before returning his gaze to Evelyn. "You never told me." Her expression remained calm. "Because I needed to know who you were before you knew who I was." She invited him to sit, then carefully opened the familiar leather portfolio resting before her. Inside were neatly organized reports, interview summaries, financial analyses, and certified records. "For the past several days," she began, "an independent team has reviewed every detail surrounding your dismissal." Ethan listened without speaking. Evelyn continued in the same gentle voice she had used inside the diner. "The evidence does not support the conclusions that cost you your career. Important records were overlooked. Critical facts were ignored. The investigation that judged you was incomplete." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment, not out of shame, but quiet relief. He had spent weeks wondering whether anyone would ever look beyond the accusations. Evelyn gently slid a single folder across the polished table toward him. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Your name deserves the same care that was never given when it was questioned. We are going to finish what others left unfinished." For the first time since walking out of his former office carrying nothing but a cardboard box, Ethan felt something unfamiliar returning to his heart. It was not victory. It was something even quieter. It was hope. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet steadiness that Ethan had almost forgotten life could hold. Independent investigators completed their review, verifying every document, every digital record, and every overlooked detail. The final report left no room for doubt. Ethan had never committed the wrongdoing that had cost him his career. His former employer issued a formal public statement correcting the record, acknowledging that the earlier investigation had failed to consider critical evidence. There were no dramatic speeches, no raised voices, only the calm weight of truth finally standing where rumor had stood before. When Ethan received the official letter restoring his professional reputation, he remained seated at his small kitchen table for several minutes, reading every line with silent gratitude. Lily looked up from her homework. "Does that mean people know the truth now?" she asked. Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening gently in the afternoon light. "Yes, sweetheart. They finally do." She walked over and wrapped her arms around him without saying another word. Some victories needed no celebration because they already felt complete. A few days later, Ethan returned to Sterling Holdings for one final meeting with Evelyn Sterling. This time there were no investigation files waiting on the polished conference table. Instead, there was a single folder containing an offer. Evelyn looked at him with the same gentle expression she had worn inside the neighborhood diner. "I would like you to lead our new Community Integrity Foundation," she said. "The organization will support families facing unexpected hardship, provide career assistance for people rebuilding their lives, and promote ethical leadership throughout our partner companies." Ethan looked down at the proposal before quietly asking, "Why me?" Evelyn smiled. "Because you never knew who I was when you chose kindness. You expected nothing. That cannot be taught in a boardroom." Ethan considered her words before closing the folder. "I will gladly accept the responsibility," he replied, "but only if every program remembers the people who feel invisible." Evelyn nodded warmly. "That was always my hope." Nearly 1 year later, the little white house on Maple Street looked much the same from the outside, but inside it had become filled with new purpose. Lily's artwork decorated nearly every wall, including the painting that read, "Home is where good hearts stay together." Ethan had framed the handwritten note Evelyn once left inside the paper bag. It now rested beside the family photographs, a quiet reminder that hope often arrives disguised as an ordinary moment. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan and Lily stood together outside the Community Integrity Foundation as volunteers unloaded boxes of food for local families. Ethan greeted every person with the same humility he had shown long before his life changed. Across the parking lot, Evelyn watched quietly from a bench beneath a row of golden maple trees. She did not wave. She simply smiled, content knowing that one warm breakfast purchased by a struggling father had grown into countless acts of kindness shared with others. As the afternoon sun settled low across the neighborhood, Ethan looked at Lily walking beside him and realized that losing his job had never truly been the end of his story. It had simply been the beginning of a journey that proved dignity does not depend on status, truth does not disappear, because it is delayed, and the smallest act of compassion offered without expecting anything in return can quietly change more lives than anyone will ever know.